Any flight with FS Flying School Pro is going to be more interesting, more challenging, and more rewarding if we fly the flight with a flight plan. If you have a flight plan, then it means that the instructor knows where you're going and how you intend to get there, and he can help you along the way, or can also bring to your attention if you're not following the flight plan and so forth. It can help you hit the waypoints at the right time and so forth. It's much more interesting if you do via the flight plan. It's not necessary. You can certainly fly without a flight plan, but of course this does mean, the key thing is, it means that your instructor doesn't know where you're going. For example, you might just want to fly around for a bit of fun, no particular purpose that day, or of course a lot of people use FS Flying School Pro to practice landings over and over, and certainly with the new on approach feature, which is part of a new feature in FS Flying School Pro, that makes practicing many landings a very simple process. So at this screen we can deal with the flight plan, some other flight parameters as well, which we can see at the bottom of the screen here, and we can also configure the on approach feature if we want to use that feature this time. It's important to understand the crucial difference between filing a flight plan or using the on approach feature. The on approach feature is purely a mechanism to set the aircraft. It will physically move the aircraft within the flight simulator world so that it is on approach to the runway that the pilot has selected, and then from there it's basically up to you to land the aircraft appropriately, competently, safely, with your instructor flying along with you. But it's not for flying a whole flight, it's for practicing approaches and landings. That's what the on approach feature is up here. Down here we have the general section for dealing with flight plans, which you're going to be using if you're going to be flying a complete flight. You're going to start off on the ground, you're going to take off, climb, cruise, begin your descent, begin your landing, and then finally land at the airport that you had selected in your flight plan. So I'll actually deal with the flight plan section first. We've got several different options here. One of the most important ones, which has been added to more recent versions of FS Flying School, is the option to be able to have FS Flying School automatically read the FSX flight plan. It's important to understand that this will automatically read when the connect button is pressed, when your session with FS Flying School starts. It will automatically read the flight plan that you have already loaded into FSX. So what this means is that if you're going to be using a flight plan, the recommended sequence is that you would start FSX, you would get yourself into an airplane, sitting at the controls inside the airplane, you're in the cockpit as it were, and then in FSX you would load a flight plan. As I'll repeat here, that you will be doing this in FSX. You will load a flight plan. You can create one, of course, if you wish, using FSX's flight planner feature, or you can load an existing flight plan. So once you've loaded that flight plan, you could, for example, look at it on the GPS. If you're using a GPS, you could look at it on the GPS within the aircraft and make sure you've got the right flight plan loaded. That's great. Okay, now then, if you have this checkbox turned on, as I have done here, then it means that when you start your session with FS Flying School by pressing the connect button, FS Flying School will automatically read in that flight plan. Now this is an enhancement over previous versions of FS Flying School, whereby this feature did not exist, and it was necessary to tell FS Flying School where where the actual file was, you'd had to load a flight plan, and so if I click the load flight plan button, we would see a list of flight plans. These would be your FSX flight plans that you had saved previously, but you did have to take that extra step. Now you can have it automated for you. You have that box turned on, so when you connect, it will automatically be using the flight plan that FSX is using, and this is definitely a time saver. The other alternative, as we just started to look at there, is you can just specifically tell FS Flying School what flight plan you want to load. So if I go ahead and click the load flight plan button there, and we see a bunch of different flight plans here. I'll pick this one here because it has a lot of VOR waypoints in it, so we'll pick that one, we'll load that in, and there it is. So we can now see this is the flight plan here with all its waypoints. We're going from let's see, we're going from JFK and we're going to Albany, and our waypoints, a lot of VOR waypoints on the way. We can see various information here about the nature of the flight plan, our departure and destination, and where we're heading to, and so forth. Okay, we can at this point specify the runway that we intend to land at. We don't have to do that at this point. We can always do that later on during the flight. That will mean that we'll have to return back to the FS Flying School Pro screen in order to be able to select the runway and indicate the runway that we want to land at. If you think you know which runway you're going to land at, then of course you can do that when you start your session with FS Flying School. When you press the connect button, you can pick the runway before then. Okay, so other options we have here is we can alternatively, if we don't have this automatically turned on so that it would automatically read FSX's flight plan, we can press this button here, which will manually, as it were, force it to read FSX's flight plan. It might be that we don't want it to do this all the time, so then we can selectively force it to read FSX's flight plan whenever we want to. I would note here that I am referring to FSX, and that is because this feature is not supported with Flight Simulator 2004. It's just for FSX. If we decide that we don't wish to fly with whatever particular flight plan we have loaded into FS Flying School, then we have the clear flight plan button, and if I click that, then the flight plan is gone. Okay, then moving on, we also have the real airport data button, which you can press here. Now at the moment this is only going to produce a result if we're flying to a destination airport that is within the United States, but if we are and we click that button, then it will open in as a separate program. It will open a web browser which is pointed at a website that has a whole mass of information, detailed information on the actual real-world airport, which we can look at and might get some tips from that, or just find it generally interesting reading. Okay, so that's there if you would like to use it as well. That will, of course, require that you have an internet connection in order to be able to get a result from that button. Okay, now we also have, as one of the newer features of FS Flying School Pro, we also have the option to have the GPS override the FS Flying School flight plan. Now what this means is that if this option is turned on and we use the GPS inside the aircraft to specify a different destination airport, so that is to say we change the destination during our flight, then the instructor will realize that that's where we're going. He will notice what we're doing with the GPS. The instructor will comment on what you have done with the GPS. That's a way of confirming that you know that he's actually seen it. And so he'll say something just generally along the lines of, okay, so we're now flying to this particular airport that you've just indicated as a destination using the GPS. And you can also, using the GPS, you can also select different approaches, and again your instructor will be watching that. So let's say, for example, you specifically select an approach that's going to have you landing at runway 19 left, then the instructor will confirm this, and he will expect you to land at the runway that you've indicated with the GPS. If you don't want the GPS to control things in this way, then of course you can just turn this option off, and at that point that means that the instructor quite simply will not be looking at what you're doing with the GPS. So again, as with so many of the features and functions of FS Flying School, this is an option and you can configure it just the way you like. Moving on, if we move on to the flight parameters section down here, these are very simple features we have down here. If we know the transition altitude in the area we'll be flying, we can put that in here. We've got the V speeds for V1, VR and V2. If we pop those in there, then that means that the instructor is going to be calling out these speeds for us as we're going down the runway for our takeoff, and he will call out those speeds for us. We've also got the option to control when the flight has officially, as it were, ended within FS Flying School Pro. It's very important that the pilot takes great care to remember what they have selected down here. You would normally set this sort of thing according to you would set it, you would probably set it and then leave it that way pretty much forever. It's up to your personal preference. Do you want the instructor to say, okay, the flight has ended when you've landed and started taxiing, or do you want to go for a more formal approach where the instructor is not going to end the flight until you set the brake? Or do you want it to be that the parking brake is set and the engines are off as well? It's up to you. If you're flying fast and loose, so to speak, then you might want the flight to end and be evaluated when you've simply landed and started taxiing. That's what we might call the quick way. Or if you're doing a more formal approach where you're getting the whole experience, you start off with the plane with the engines off, cold and dark. You go through the whole procedure, you fly your flight, and at the end of it you taxi back to parking, or you taxi back to a gate, and then you shut everything down. It would be at that point then that you'd want the flight evaluated, and so you could choose one of these two options instead. It's entirely up to you, but it's important to remember which one you've chosen, because what happens sometimes, we do get support questions from folks who forget what they've done here basically, and they will, for example, they will choose this option here, and they will notice then that their flights never seem to end. The instructor doesn't give them a score, doesn't tell them what's happening, doesn't evaluate the flight, and it's because they haven't finished the flight, they haven't set the brake, and they haven't turned the engines off. So you can change this, of course, whenever you wish, but try to remember what it was that you did there, otherwise things might get a little confusing. So that's the flight parameters down there, and then we come to the one of my favorite sections of the program that has proven very popular with the introduction with its introduction in FS Flying School Pro, and that is the on approach feature. As I said before, this feature is rather unlike the other features in FS Flying School Pro, which are the other features they're based on the idea that you're going to be flying a flight, you're going to often take off, fly, land, this sort of thing, normal flight. But the on-approach feature is different to that. It is for practicing approaches and landings over and over again. Okay, as we often say, the great thing about it is because you can set it up so quickly, you might be able to practice 6 or 7 approaches and landing during your lunchtime. So you can really get a lot of practice in if you want to. It enables you to set up the aircraft on approach to any runway in the world in a matter of seconds, whereas if you were doing this manually inside Flight Simulator, well, it would take longer than that. It might take a couple of minutes, but there are steps that have to be taken, procedures that have to be followed, and this automates the whole thing. So, to get right into what it actually does, let's go through the fields. The first thing that we can do is we can specify the ICAO code of an airport that we want to fly the approach to. And notice as I hover over that almost all of the controls in FS Flying School Pro's user interface, that is to say the screens that we're looking at right now, this little grey box, the program itself, if we allow the mouse to just hover, you just let it go and let it hover over almost any of these controls, then you will get help for what that control does. And that can be a very easy way to help orient your way around the program. So anyway, going back, let's say we wanted to practice an approach, for example, at, let's say we're going to Green Bay, so let's say that, and we'll say find the airport. Let's make sure that that's a real code, and sure enough it is. We're going to Green Bay, and we can tell let's see, we can tell the on approach feature. Let's say we're not going to choose a random airport at this point. We want to fly to that specific airport. We can now tell it how many nautical miles out from the runway that we want to start. So let's imagine that we're doing a quick practice in a little Cessna, so we're going to start 3 miles out. From runway, we can land at any runway we like at this particular airport. So let's just to show the feature, we'll pick a different runway. Okay, and we're going to be starting. We're going to be 3 miles out. We're going to be starting at 100 knots. Over here, we can see that the runway is concrete. We've got its surface type, its length, its width, its elevation, and the frequency for ATIS. We can also, if we wish, we can set the time of day. This is a particularly useful feature because it means that if we want to practice night landings, for example, especially if we're using the random airport feature, we can select random airports for our practicing runways all over the world, and by setting the local time of day, here for example, if we did that, we would know that no matter where in the world the FS Flying School took us, it would always be noon when we were doing our landing. If we wanted to do some night landings, obviously we might decide that we're going to have, let's see, we're going to be coming in at 2 o'clock in the morning, or for that matter 2:15. Set whatever you like there, and it will be that local time of day when the approach starts. We can also, if we want, we can have wind involved with our approach. So let's see, we could say that we want the wind. We've got the different directions for the wind here. So let's say we want the wind to be 120 at 6 knots. Okay, we can have gusts if we want to. Note that the tip tells us that this should be used with caution. This can be very challenging, and the gusts, the strength of the gusts, are in proportion to the wind speed that we've selected here. If you select a high wind speed and you turn on gusts, it's going to be very, very difficult. So use that with caution, but have fun with it. It's up to you. And then we can also set the visibility if we want. We've got the visibility here. This is in nautical miles, and so obviously when the visibility gets down low, we get into a very, very challenging situation. So let's imagine we're going to set it at 1 mile for this particular one. And then we've also got some other filters that we can use when we are using a random airport. Okay, so if we said set random airport, it means that the value in here will be ignored. It will choose a random airport from all the runways in the world, which FS Flying School has the data on, of course, and so which is to say all the runways in Flight Simulator. Okay. So if we're going to be setting a random airport, then we can start to use these filters down here. So let's imagine that just for now we were going to do the approach to Green Bay as we had said. The key thing that we must do is we must turn on this checkbox here, which, as we can see from the tooltip, if I bring that up again, let's see, how do I, there we go. Select this to cause Flying School to put you on approach when connect is pressed. So if you've ticked that box there, it means that when you press connect, it will move your aircraft to the on approach position. You'll be up in the air on approach to that runway when you press connect. You can see this happening inside Flight Simulator. When you switch back to Flight Simulator, you can see that the Flight Simulator is loading the scenery and so forth for the airport that you've chosen. It's important to note that checkbox though, because some folks have missed it, and if you don't turn it on, then all this will do nothing. It won't position you at the airport because you haven't turned the checkbox on. Now you might say, well, why is there a checkbox there at all? And the reason, of course, is that you might be at this screen simply because you're telling FS Flying School about a flight plan and you don't want to do the on approach. So this turns the on approach feature on and off. So it's an important checkbox. Okay, so I'll turn it back on there as if we were going to do it. Now let's imagine we're going to do our approach to Green Bay, so we would press connect and we would be positioned 3 miles out from Green Bay, flying at 100 knots. We're lined up on approach to runway 18, and we've got wind, we've got no gusts on this one, we've got low visibility, and the time will be 2:15 in the morning local time. Okay, if instead we want to do a random approach, and this is a very interesting and fun feature of the on approach function in FS Flying School Pro, it means that we can travel all around the world in a lunchtime, as it were, just by setting up random approaches. So you click on the set random approach and it will select a random airport for us. So let's go ahead and click the random approach and see what we get. Okay, well, we get an interesting airport there. Let's click another one. Okay, some interesting names coming up here, which I won't even attempt to pronounce. Let's see if we can get something that... okay, Grimsby. We have Grimsby there. And click a few more, and we've got Fairchild International in Port Angeles. Okay, now we've got some filters that we can use by setting the random airport. We can set it so that the ICAO codes start with, so if we wanted to say we're going to be flying, let's see, we're going to fly around in the States, so we can set a random airport there, and now we're going to be getting random airports quite simply that start with K. Alright, we might instead, as the tooltip suggests to us, let's say we want to try the United Kingdom, so if we put EG in there, we select a random airport, then we're going to get EG airports, and that's what we've got here. Okay, and of course the codes, many of us will know the international codes for the different regions of the world, but of course if you don't, then obviously this information is widely available. So that's controlling that filter there. Or alternatively, we might want to practice, let's say we want to practice landings at high elevation runways, so let's clear that so we don't control that. But what we'll do, although these can all be used together, but I'll just to do our example here, let's say we want very high elevation runways, so we want the minimum elevation to be 9,000 feet, and let's go ahead and get a random airport and see what we get. Okay, so right, so we've got La Quiaca, and we can also set the maximum elevation that we want as well, so any of these in here. The other thing we can do with that, of course, is if we say that the maximum elevation is 0 feet, and we clear that, and then we ask for a random airport, then we're going to get, if we click a few more here, we can see we're getting airports that are having a maximum elevation of 0 feet. And then in the runway types, we can also specify if we want runways that have ILS, only runways with ILS, or do we want runways that don't have ILS, that's to say the instrument landing system, or do we just want all runways? So we can control it with that. So if for example, if I clear the elevation and we go over to, let's say we go back to the United Kingdom, let's say for example, and we choose ILS only, and then we'll click on the random airport, and so now we're getting, of course this is not so much airports, this is selecting runways. We're only now going to get runways that have an ILS frequency, an instrument landing system that we can tune nav1 to, and if we click on some more here, we can see that the runways we're getting have all got ILS. Okay, and let's see here, I think that pretty much covers it. Yep, yes, I think it does. Okay, you'll forgive my hesitation there. I wanted to make sure we covered this subject thoroughly. So that's the on approach feature of FS Flying School Pro, and it's something that folks are having a lot of fun with. We're getting a lot of positive feedback on that feature because it does, it's a great way to practice approaches and landings at any runway in the world, and it's the sort of thing that it's a great way of using Flight Simulator if you only have a little bit of time. you may not have enough time to fly an entire flight, even in a little aircraft like a Cessna, and you just want a challenge. So boom, off you go, and you can fly your approaches. And that just about wraps up our description of the flight plan screen of FS Flying School Pro.